Hello, my name is Dan Farisi. I am Group Editor, Commercial and Security with Emerald. The topic of this presentation is commercial integration trends, which aligns, of course, with commercial integrators' focus. So thank you so much, Mark Coxon and Chris Whitley, for being here today. You want to just give a brief bio of yourself? I think everyone here probably knows you, but just in brief, introduce yourself and your connection to the commercial integration industry.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having us here. My name is Chris Whitley. Been in the industry for 25 years. I run a commercial buying group in the industry where we bring integrators together with vendor partners at shows like this and try to help them get better through collaboration and improve their profits. So here to talk to you about some of the trends we see with some of our members.
Hey, Mark?
Great. I'm Mark Coxon. I'm with the Experience Technology Group within AVI-SPL. Actually started in residential integration in 2002, so I used to be on this side of the ball. CEDIA was a very familiar place for me. Was one of the first contributors to Commercial Integrator when you started the magazine. I came out of CE Pro into Commercial Integrator, so industry blogger and business development director for AVI-SPL.
Well, thank you again so much for being here. Really do appreciate it. And I want to start with Experience, which you mentioned, Mark, is really part of the division of AVI-SPL you work with. I think there's really a drive in the industry now toward those wow-worthy experiences. And it's one thing if you're talking about like an immersive museum or an entertainment space or something like that. But what about small rooms, Teams rooms, workspaces? Is there a way to make those environments more valuable, more enticing, more worthy of the commute, for example, in a corporate space, by making it experiential? Or is experiential really reserved for kind of entertainment and leisure time environments?
Yeah, the interesting thing is we're in a spot where if you're going to have a real estate footprint, there has to be a purpose, there has to be a reason to do the work in the office versus doing the work at home, right? So if we're focusing on utility and we're just focusing on the utility of doing work, you can do the work from anywhere. I can take a video call at my house, I can take it in a semi-trailer parked in an empty lot, I can take it here from the floor, I can take it in office space. So the real question is, how are we actually allowing people to do better work through creating spaces that tilt them towards those better work habits, more productivity, a more hands-on experience, et cetera. And so when we're talking about this with clients, we're not usually looking at utility, and we trade I/O. So I joke, the I/O of AV, the inputs and outputs. In experience design, your I/O is impact and outcomes. So what impact are you trying to create? And what are the outcomes that you're trying to produce? And how do I create environments that create better outcomes? And so I think the focus on experience can work really well, because we have the tendency in this industry to design based on the number of chairs and the floor plan. And we look at the floor plan and we see 4 chairs and we go, okay, that's a 55-inch display, that's a camera under the display, and we've got a beamforming microphone in the ceiling, and I've covered this amount of square footage, provided a screen, a camera, and a speaker. But the way that marketing uses a room may be different than the way that an R&D team uses a room, may be different than when an executive comes in and does a financial review. And so, the second somebody stands up in that room and then starts talking to the people in the room, presenting, all of a sudden that camera's at their belt buckle, you're giving the remote audience a nice shot of someone's midsection. So maybe that camera needs to be at a different spot. Maybe there needs to be a second camera for those type of meetings. So when we think about experience and we're actually thinking about the task that's being done, experience matters to every size room, not just to the big wow moments.
What would you add on that topic, Chris?
I don't know what else I can add, no. But it's interesting because you mentioned the immersive experience with the small meeting room, and we first started after the pandemic talking about meeting equity, right? Where everybody had the same tile in the screen, and we were all present, and that felt immersive because we were all equal. But I think to your point, Mark, the immersive meeting room where you have multiple cameras and some of the innovation that's happening, that's coming out, is making it available so that somebody stands up, the camera adjusts with them, and you feel like you're in the room with them and actually getting that experience. Speaking as a work from home person, it is really hard when you're that remote participant to really feel like that. So, I watched something earlier today with the Cisco immersive room. May not be for everyone because of budget, but you really felt like you were in that meeting, whether you were in the meeting or not. So I think that's great what you guys are doing, and our guys are looking at similar things as well to provide that experience.
Well, I think if we think about where we're at, everybody wants to use AI as a buzzword, right? And we talk about, oh, these cameras are AI enabled. Well, they're doing some sensor-based automation. Like, hey, I hear a sound from this direction. I'm going to use this preset to capture where that sound is coming from. And that's one way to create some kind of automation in the room in order to use technology to do that. But all that does is tells me where someone is speaking. But if you think about the real dynamic of a meeting, if we were all sitting in a room and somebody said we went over budget by $1 million and the CEO's in that room, everybody in that room is going to look at the CEO to see what his expression is when he hears that piece of information. That camera is not going to pick that up. So if we're really talking about like opportunity for AI, could AI be able to be able to understand where the attention is in the room? If 4 people's heads turn and look over there, the camera should probably zoom in on what everybody else in the room is looking at and not just stay trained on the speaker because they're the one that have the audio track that's controlling the camera preset, right? So when we really think about the ability of AI to start to transfer some of these rooms, and we talk about personalized experience and the remote experience, giving somebody the ability to see what all the other people in the room are seeing in the same way that they're seeing it, as opposed to giving them some kind of preset run of show based on if-then loops, gets you out of sensor-based automation and into real AI, which we're not quite there yet, but that's the promise of what some of that could bring.
And that obviously is a very exciting possible future in the years ahead. I want to talk a little bit about kind of heavily customized integration versus adopting standardized approaches to integration. Obviously, if you're an organization of, say, 50 people, it's going to be hard to do 25 different a la carte DIY spaces, each one different from the next. What do you think as far as boutique integration approaches versus highly efficient standardized approaches? Which is the best method for commercial integrators to embrace right now? Or is it really a matter of deciding what we individually are good at as a business and leaning into that, recognizing it's not going to be the same for every firm?
Yes. Great question, Dan. I'm going to pause a little bit and collect my thought here. But the first part, I think it depends on what your business wants to be. They're not going to say you need to standardize or you should be boutique. But one of the problems that, the innovation that we talked about with these small rooms, right? If you're customizing each one of those and every one is different, it's really hard to service and scale and get scale of that business. So yeah, if you're a little bit smaller, you don't have the resources that Mark does, you can't be everything to everyone. However, you can choose to be that, but then you have to realize you're probably going to be small and just have a niche. So I don't know that there's one that's better than another. It's really taking that internal search, looking at your business, your service capabilities, and saying, we're going to do that, but then you do, pick a horse and ride it, so to speak. You can't try to standardize and be boutique. I think that's really hard unless you have the resources and size of some of the larger integrators.
Yeah, I have this talk all the time about standardization, and anytime I'm talking about experience, we always run up against, well, we have this standard. And so we're talking about experience, we're talking about potentially changing something that goes against a potential standard that may already be in place with this customer, this company, et cetera. And our job isn't to disrupt that, but what I typically will talk to people about is that, there may be 5 to 10% of the spaces that are worth going off the standard for. Right, so and we have to really, and that's when we think about impact. Okay, this is a room where you bring customers in to do a multi-million-dollar pitch. They come here from all over the world. They sit in here for an hour and a half, and if they leave, they're going to spend $20 million with you. You don't want to do something different in this room. Are you sure? Because the opportunity cost of not getting someone's attention and cementing a call to action when they're in this room for that 2 hours is really, really high. So this may be a space that you want to do coordinated lighting, that you might want to do something immersive on the sidewalls, or you might want to have some way that you can co-create, co-design a solution with the customer real time, give them something to touch and feel that's tangible using RFID tags with your products that are now manipulating data as they're walking through, giving them agency over presentation. That may not be something you ever standardize, but that may be something that has a lot of impact in that piece and has a high ROI or a high opportunity cost for not doing that. And so I always say, let's run with your standard. If we can use things that are within your standard in this 20% or 5-10% use case, we will. And then where do we need to go off the map? The other interesting thing I find about standards is this. We feel like when somebody says we have a standard that is set in stone. People say, Teams is my standard. Well, guess what? Teams wasn't your standard 4 years ago because it wasn't around. So that standard has changed at some point, right? Your standard used to be life size, or your standard used to be Cisco, or used to be, Polycom codecs. At some point, there was a business need to move away from that standard because you needed a feature or a benefit that wasn't involved in that standard, and so you slightly migrated your standard towards something else to take advantage of something that actually had a better business benefit for you. Cloud-based, not owning my own infrastructure was better for you than owning your own infrastructure with hard codec. That's why you moved to a Teams type environment. That standard shifts and changes. So I think many times we think of standard as like it's this thing that's concrete, etched in stone, and has lived here forever and it can't be changed. It's changed all the time based on business need and business case. And so if you can really get down with the customer to what are you trying to do? Why do you want to do it? Where does your current standard leave you dropped off at the curb, and are you willing to make that compromise, or do we need to add something to it to get the extra percentage out of that to be valuable to your business? And that's a hard conversation to broker, but that's a valuable business conversation for our partners.
It's a really good and important point. Standard does not mean something immutable from now until the end of time. Very much true. If you've had any conversation with me at this show, previous shows, you've probably heard me use the cliche, the easy button. I'm hearing a lot these days where people just say, it just needs to work. Make it easy, make it intuitive, it just needs to work. But I want to think a little bit more deeply about that, because it needs to work every day for whoever is using it, regardless of whatever knowledge or background they might have. Basically, there are different constituencies in every vertical market and every environment in which integrators are working that are going to be using tools in different ways. So if the idea is that clients these days want simplicity, they want intuitiveness, they want it, quote unquote, to just work, what does that mean given the fact that there are going to be different constituencies in these spaces every day?
Okay, yeah, so this is near and dear to my heart. I wrote about this. It just needs to work, does have those 4 layers. It needs to function, it needs to work reliably and consistently, it needs to work for the person that's in the room, and it needs to provide the actual performance or the outcome that the person wanted, right? Like if the camera comes on and we have a video call and it was great, but nobody leaves that meeting understanding what their action items are, it was a failed meeting whether the system functioned or not, right? So there are a lot of layers to this idea of it just needs to work. I do understand that we don't want to overcomplicate things for no reason. And I think, maybe there's a reputation of our industry sometimes to potentially overcomplicate things for no reason and to not simplify them. We're in an era where the easy button is closer than ever. We have the ability to ID people with NFC tags, with their phones, with all sorts of things to give people personalized experiences, and we've been talking about that for a long time. I don't know that we've executed that as well as maybe we've talked about it, but there is the potential to do that and to make those things easier as people come into spaces. I will say the other thing that I think about when I think about this, it just has to work. Sometimes we move towards a lowest common denominator. And again, that lowest common denominator could have an opportunity cost, right? And so I'll have people that say, well, this space needs to be flexible. There's a flexible space, and because it's a flexible space, we just want it to work in these 4 or 5 different configurations, and we need to be able for it to work in those different scenarios. And that's great, but what's the case that makes the most difference? Because we don't want to make something flexible for the 20% fringe case that doesn't have really any value to it, right? Like you can do a really high-end meeting in that pitch space I talked about. You could also just have 5 people sit down in there and not use all the lighting controls, stuff like that. So the 20% case of like, hey, 20% of the time our executives just sit in here, so let's just make this a basic space. No, 80% of the time customers are in here and we're closing deals. So let's make sure we're catering to the biggest impact, biggest space, and not using flexibility as an excuse to dumb down systems that really should have more, experiential component to them. So yeah, this just needs to work, has a lot of layers to it. Good enough has a lot of layers to it, right? Like we hear these things all the time. Like I said, my computer hooked to Wi-Fi in a semi-trailer works. Is it good? Do people like being on that meeting with me? Do people respond to me in the right way? Would a customer hire me after seeing, the inside of a semi-trailer with spray paint on it? Maybe not, So like it just needs to work, does have some layers to it.
Anything you would add on that point, Chris? The layers in that just need to work, or easy button idiom?
Yeah, I might look at this from a little different perspective. The easy button in my mind is has to work, means has to start. I don't have to call somebody, get support, really it kind of starts on time. But it can still be effective, but now with the younger generations that are coming up and everybody buying on experience or the experience, I'm going to go back to what Mark said. It needs to function, needs to work and effective, but yet it can still be all those things and still not be a great experience. And I think you need to not go down the road of just easy and it has to work. Still consider the experience stuff, because it would be easy to say, it's an effective meeting, everybody heard it, everybody knows what happened, but still may not feel like you were right there, especially if you've got remote participants in that. So I think focusing on easy, but also having that real immersive experience with it is the magic if you can accomplish that.
I think, as you both know, Commercial Integrator, really all of our connected brands under Emerald beat the drum for moving more towards services, more toward OpEx as opposed to CapEx. I would think, and let me know if you disagree, that would come more naturally the more you move into standardized integration, where you, as opposed to doing a lot of different boutique kind of spaces. If there is this mythical single pane of glass for remote monitoring, kind of a unified dashboard where you're going to get a holistic picture of what's going on in an organization, if that exists, if that's attainable for the average integrator, how can they attain it? Should they be aiming for that? Or is that something that is perhaps kind of like a false god we're reaching toward but isn't actually there? How important is that to the future of the integration industry?
I think it's extremely important. I mean, I've worked for some companies that had some really great products, but because they didn't have an API that allowed that interface or that management suite of software be integrated into a master system, those products weren't adopted, right? And our customers want to be able to, if they're going to support multiple spaces, they don't want to be on SneakerNet running to rooms to turn things on, to flip switches, to look at lights, to do all those things. And it's not scalable from an organizational standpoint. More and more of our customers, at least from my perspective, as we see companies start to right size, downsize, whatever you want to call it, they're letting people go, right? Like at the end of the day, a lot of companies are letting more and more people go, especially as things become more automated, and they're looking to their service providers to be able to pick up that slack in what they're not doing with those people, or they're looking for efficiencies to make the people that they have be able to then do that more work without having to overburden them with hours, right? So we're seeing this insourcing start to happen more and more and more and more. And being able to have a single pane of glass to not only look at things like, is my Logitech camera on, is my TV on, is the projector bulb going to die at any point, or is my laser engine at half-life, whatever that happens to be, but also be able to integrate in the pane of glass that lets you see the back end of your Teams calls and your Zoom sessions and those APIs that come in. And they are starting to now have panes of glass that let you not only see your equipment, but your cloud-based delivery systems as well. When you get both of those into one thing, now all of a sudden an IT manager can look at a building, know the health of something, do white glove service for an executive without having to be in a room, and control those things much better. And of course, like we've talked about before, it also allows us to plan our investments better over time, right? Because it allows our customers to see what they're using, how they're using it, when they're using it, know that they might increase the amount of rooms that do this because those are booked 100% of the time and these rooms are booked 20% of the time, so maybe we don't build as many of those next time, or we reallocate those resources. I'll say the other interesting thing with the pane of glass, as we move towards this idea of spaces being connection centers for people to do better work together, which you're seeing with Microsoft Places, if you guys are familiar with the Places movement, or Zoom Spaces, I think is their version of it, right? What we're seeing is now we're using these not only to manage our equipment, but we're actually using these to curate connections with people. So where something like office booking software before told you where you could sit if you came in a building, if you had hoteling. So you come in the lobby, you look, and it says where I sit, tells you facilities people that you've got 70% occupancy in the building. Great. Now what it can do is you can come in, and when you pick a seat, it says, hey, these 7 people that you email with the most that are on your team are on floor 2, and 3 of them are sitting over in the neighborhood by the cafe. Would you like to book a desk next to your team? Now all of a sudden you're getting some curation. That same software could say, hey, 7 of your teammates just checked in at the office. I noticed you have a meeting at 3 today. Would you guys like to do it in person instead? This room's open. And you can say, yeah, I'll go into the office because 7 of them are there. We'll use the room. We'll do this thing in person. Those opportunities are now there where our booking systems and hospitality management systems can now become a social media network for your workforce that are helping curate better meetings and connections for the people that are coming in, and actually helping coordinate those chance encounters, what we used to call chance encounters in the office, the water cooler bump in conversation, et cetera, can now actually be curated and planned in a way that they couldn't before. So we have to think about the implications of what the data can do as well, besides just managing the building and the systems themselves.
It's kind of refreshing, Chris, isn't it? The idea that we can actually use these technology tools to increase socialization, to drive a tighter company culture, a better and enricher company culture, and actually bring people together as opposed to having like technology silos keeping us apart.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I'll get to the culture piece, but I think it's, the single pane of glass, I think it's important. And it's difficult, I think, for the mid-tier integrator, because you either have to develop it yourself or find somebody that maybe has a platform already, because a lot of the manufacturers have their own piece, but you kind of, what I see, and you might correct me on this, Mark, but you kind of have to coddle that together, and then you've got, you still have disparate remote monitoring that you're bringing into a single pane of glass. There are some vendor partners out there that are helping integrators do that, where it's all in one. So I think, choose the partners, but I think that's real important, because it's that proactive service piece that makes you a true partner with your end user versus just somebody that you call when you have a problem. In terms of, being able to have the scheduling software and all this stuff drive the culture, it's extremely exciting, especially for remote employees, right? But I've said for years, we sell the stuff and we say that we're collaborating and we use this technology. Use it to drive your culture, because it is what connects. And the younger generations that we're trying to connect, they connect digitally now. I mean, they've had screens in their faces. They don't pick up the phone. So the only way to drive those chance encounters is to connect them digitally with those technology tools. And I look forward to the AI, where it takes us. It's, where is it going? I don't know. Get ready. But I look forward to how we can use that to help drive culture.
I was going to mention one more thing on what you said on the pane of glass too, and I think having good manufacturer partners that can explain to you the differences in their products and the way things work. So like working with customers, looking at certain things like. You'll have brands that have like maybe an integrated PC running like an Android OS to run the codec for something like a soundbar that has built-in, the built-in codec, Teams-ready soundbar, versus something that has to be hooked to a Nook PC. And the amount of data that you might be able to get out of an Android OS versus something that's actually running on a PC into the pane of glass may be different, depending on that ecosystem. So really leaning in, if you are looking to develop something, leaning in and saying, hey, if I'm doing a mixed environment, do I have to do stuff that's all on Android, or do I have to do stuff that's all on PCs? If I'm in a mixed environment, do I have to use your software, or do you have APIs that port that out? Like all of those things, like as companies, if you're looking to build that, it's really important to have those great relationships with like people here on the floor on a technical level that you can actually get the real data out of, not just the marketing cut sheet on like, well, we have a single pane of glass, like if you do these 7 things, right? So just knowing those little nuances is very important as well.
So the last thing I want to touch on as we begin to wrap up the conversation is something that you kind of alluded to, Mark, the idea that integrators increasingly are becoming part, in some sense, of their client's organization. They're ingratiating themselves, they're enmeshing themselves much more. I oftentimes use the term, we're not contractors, we're not installers. What we are strategic advisors, we're strategic partners. We are wedded to you and we stand shoulder to shoulder with you. Is that part of the future of the commercial integration channel, the idea of kind of tearing down the wall that would otherwise separate the integrator from the client and saying, we are in effect one. We are on the same team working together to deliver an outcome. I am not your contractor, I am your partner, and I stand shoulder to shoulder with you.
It's extremely important. And let me say that the two worst things you can be to one of your customers is a vendor or a dealer. A vendor, people think of putting money in and getting a product out, like a vending machine. A dealer is usually drugs or a car, which most people don't like either of those experiences, right? So if you consider yourself a vendor or a dealer and not a business partner, but what does that actually mean when you're talking about having these conversations? And it really is helping somebody zoom out and think about what they're trying to accomplish. People come to me all the time like, we want wow factor in our lobby. We want to buy a 400 inch screen in our lobby. I'm like, okay, well, what are you actually trying to do? Who's comes in here? What are you trying to tell them? And if they listened and heard it, what are you actually wanting them to do for an outcome? Do you want them to become a customer? You want them to join a mission? You want them to give a kidney to a cancer hospital? What do you want them to do? Then what's the best way to tell them to do that? Then what's the delivery method, which I'm going to help you with in a technology standpoint in order to deliver that thing? If you can have more holistic conversations with customers then come to you when they have ideas and not when they have projects. And when people come to you when they have ideas and problems, you are a partner. When people come to you when they want to buy something, you are a vendor or a dealer. Okay? Now, ultimately, you want that problem to turn into a sale. I'm not saying that, right? Like, I'm a business development guy, too. We want that problem to turn into a sale, but we have to be the people they come to when they have ideas that they want to vet or problems they want to solve. And that requires us to zoom out in the types of conversations we have with people and widen our networks beyond IT and procurement into HR, into the marketing suite, into the C-suite to talk about actual business problems that turn into IT procurement requests.
Chris?
Awesome question, Dan. I want to agree with Mark. The last part of what you said is what I want to tag on to. We are in the perfect position to be a strategic partner for our customers, because when you talk about designing an immersive space, you're not just dealing with the facility manager, the IT manager, you are touching every constituency in the company. Imagine if you're just a vendor, you're generally dealing with one piece of a company, not all pieces. You're dealing with HR and everybody else that uses that meeting room as well. So you have the opportunity to get ideas from every aspect of the company, not just somebody that wants to put in a new conference room or something. So you have the ability to become much better and much more strategic, because it's human-centered design, right? That you're designing all these spaces around. So as you engage with humans around that in all the different disciplines, they're going to come to you because they feel good. And I'm going to bring you this idea. You're my strategic partner. So I think we have the opportunity to touch all aspects of the company, and we should. And we should do it more than we do.
Yeah, I was going to say, we live in a time where the benchmarks of the event, I won't say it, era are no longer valid, right? Like in the old days, you worked at this company, you sat in this seat, you did this work. There wasn't a question about it. If you work here, you sit here and you do this thing. That's what you do. And if you don't want this job and you don't want to work here and sit here and do this thing, don't take the job. Now companies are faced with this whole thing, do people like it? They never had to worry about that before. Right? So there are a whole other set of questions now that start to emerge, and a whole set of problems that nobody has the benchmark for. And you as integrators, us as integrators, because we see so many other companies trying to solve these same problems, one of the best, most valuable things that we can bring to people are the trends that we're seeing and how other people are starting to explore and solve these problems. And so the breadth and width of what we do is actually the value in those conversations we can have with our customers as well.
Well, speaking of trends, I want to thank you, Mark. Thank you, Chris, for joining me for this short conversation, just touching on some of the operative trends affecting the commercial integration space today. Really appreciate you sharing freely of your insights. We look forward to sharing this conversation in the days and weeks ahead online on commercialintegrator.com and elsewhere. Again, thank you so much for being here, being part of the Commercial Integrator Expo content panel and this experience.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.